Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based on wherever you're logging in from. Let me introduce myself. My name is Harsha. I'm one of the CR experts here at eGMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. I will be doing this session with you. So let's get right into it. What is it that we're going to do today? All right. So this session is called Visualization and Prethinking, the one-two punch that you need to ace GMAT Critical Reasoning. And there's a reason for that. Here at eGMAT, we believe that visualization and pre-thinking is like the one-two punch you need to ace critical reasoning, especially as the questions get more difficult. And today, I'm happy to tell you, you guys are going to solve at least some difficult questions, which should really, tickle your brain a little bit. So let's get into it. What are we going to discuss today? First, let me discuss very briefly what I mean by this one-two punch. What is this visualization? What is this pre-thinking that I'm talking about? That's step one. Once you've understood what these things are, then let's solve some actual CR questions. So 4 to 5 questions, we'll see in based on time how much we can discuss. But all these questions are OG, GMAT prep, modified OG. I've added some modifications in some of these questions. The process is very, very simple. We solve, we discuss, and you learn, hopefully, right? So let's get into understanding what visualization and pre-thinking actually are. So this is the only bit of theory that I have for today. After this, we're going to get into the hardcore session where you're going to solve questions. So do pay attention here. What is visualization? In simple words, as per us, it's being, you take a sentence, being able to understand the sentence so well that it's not just that you've understood it so well that you can express it in your own way without any meaning distortion. You should be able to you should be able to express the exact correct idea without any change in the meaning in your own way, without having to look at the text. Now, it's one thing to look at the text that's given to you and being able to replay that. That's like by hearting. That doesn't get you anywhere. But being able, having that level of understanding where you're able to actually communicate that idea in your own words, that's what we call as visualization. Some interesting things, some important things that you should know about this: because you're able to express it in your own way, you've absorbed that sentence to that level. What this means is it's practically in your head. And as we solve some of these questions, you're going to see the importance of that. You'll see cases where if you forgot a certain sentence that you had read earlier in the argument, then your answer choice analysis is going to be difficult. You're going to see that in practical examples today. Now, visualization means that you do not miss the granular nuances. You will see examples where even one tiny word makes a difference to the meaning. It distorts the meaning. So if you read things like a storybook, you are not going to be able to catch it. Because when you read storybooks, you tend to skim things. If any of you have this habit of reading storybooks, you know how you read. I also used to read a lot of books. So fundamentally your brain starts skipping some certain words because the focus is on moving forward, understanding what's happening at a broad level. But that kind of reading is detrimental on the GMAT. You need to go slow, you need to pick up all these nuances. Another important aspect that you should know about visualization, and you should know right now, is this applies to every single sentence, even the answer choices. A lot of times, what I see students typically do is you put in all the hard work in understanding the argument, you've done everything in terms of upfront analysis. But when you come to the answer choices, sometimes we tend to chill out. Now, that again, it's like you're messing up your end game. So, if you don't properly sit, understand, and visualize that sentence, yet again, there is a possibility of going wrong in the answer choices. Okay. So let's get right into it. Why is this so important? Because it's only at this level that you're picking up those exact nuances. So what is the exact conclusion? What is the exact logic? What are those other details that should be there in your brain when you're doing this analysis? It's only when you get into this level of understanding sentences where your answer choice analysis also becomes easier, especially when you solve the complex questions, the ones with complex answer choices. This skill is vital. So if so far we are good, let me get into the other element. So we saw visualization, that's practically my punch one. Punch two is what I call pre-thinking. So again, pay attention to this definition because it's kind of important to understand what pre-thinking really is as far as we are concerned. Now, pre-thinking, as far as we at eGMAT are concerned, is you spend, once you've read the argument, once you've truly understood the argument, you spend a couple of seconds, you spend a few seconds to come up with at least one pre-thought idea. How do you do this? By truly deliberating on the logic of the argument. Understand what the conclusion is, understand what the logic is. Deliberate for a few seconds on that. You're going to come up with pre-thought ideas. One very important point, you have to do this before you go into the answer choices. If you do anything like pre-thinking after you take a peek at the answer choices, that pre-thinking you can throw into the dustbin. It's useless. You have to do it free from bias. The minute your brain sees an answer choice, it biases your brain. Your brain starts trying to force fit scenarios rather than you thinking organically of scenarios. So we're going to see all these elements at play today. So again, a few aspects about pre-thinking that you should know. It's not meant to be done in minutes. On the real exam, it's meant to be done in seconds. You cannot do pre-thinking for 2 minutes and then expect to do well in CR. No. Pre-thinking, once you have understood the argument, it's a matter of maximum 15 seconds. And a lot of cases, you won't even take that much time. So I hope that point is clear. That point is coming through. Um, Essentially, pre-thinking is just applying your logical brain to understand the universe of the problem better. When I say universe of the problem in argument based questions, that means two things. You truly understand the conclusion, you truly understand the logic used to arrive at the conclusion. You have a depth grip on this, then apply your logical brain to analyze this argument, analyze this conclusion, analyze this logic, find what are the gaps. It's purely about that. And I think Taha Mohsin asked a very good question. Is it just predicting what could be the answer? Absolutely not. And that is the popular misconception that a lot of people have about pre-thinking. Pre-thinking is this. It's the purpose is not to predict the answer choice. 80 to 85% of the cases, your whatever you predict will come as an answer choice, but that's just there. That's not the focus of pre-thinking. The objective of pre-thinking is to make sure that you apply your logical brain to the universe of the problem. You understood the problem, spend a few seconds analyzing the problem, understand what this argument is really about. It gives you a deeper understanding. How does it help? This understanding that you get can help you in your answer choice analysis. Very, very clear. Essentially, it's all about spending your time on the problem for a few seconds. Again, it has to be seconds. If it's minutes, you're not doing it right. But once you're done with that upfront analysis, then your answer choice analysis usually becomes a little smoother. All right. With that, the introductions are done, the theory is done. Now we're going to solve some questions. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. Okay. Honestly, a lot of learning, and this is the reason every GMAT expert worth his or her salt will ask you to create an error log. A lot of your review, a lot of your actual learning comes from that process of reflecting on questions. So you could solve 100 questions, but that's not going to add as much value as solving 20 questions but then spending, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes or even up to 30 minutes initially on reviewing those questions. Each and every decision point, if there is an answer that you, if you, for example, you chose a wrong answer, what made you choose that wrong answer? If you chose that wrong answer, it also means that you rejected a correct answer. What made you reject that right answer? And is there some other answer choice that uh, you did not actually understand but you just got lucky in rejecting? So your error log gets into a very detailed level of analysis. Each and every sentence, did you understand it? Do you take additional time? What was the issue? When you do review at this level, when you reflect on those learnings, it easily, any question can take you this kind of a timeline. If you're doing this level of review, then you will learn even from 20 questions. So you should see an improvement if you do this to answer that question. All right, so let's get into question one. Here's the question. Um, let's share the form. So Kanupriya, can you please share the form with the students? Essentially, you have this is the passage, and we are starting with a simple warm-up exercise. This is what I like to call a simple visualization warm-up. Sentence level. How do you do this? This should not be difficult at all for most of you. So that form should have 4 questions. So let's solve. Let's discuss. All right. All the best. All right, folks. So let's take another 10 seconds. I think most of you are done. Let's take another 10 seconds and then let's begin discussing this. All right. So let's get into discussing this. So any quick words? Did you guys struggle with this? I'm sure it was not too much of a struggle, but I still see some interesting results here. So use the comment pod. Let me know how these questions were. This is a warm up exercise. We are getting into the hard questions after this. Okay. So meanwhile, let me capture our accuracy. Where are we for all of these questions? So all right. First question. Yeah. Nine of you got it right. Nine of you told me the answer is yes. So here, let me just register that. Nine of you told me that yeah, this can be inferred, and another four of you told me that this cannot be inferred. All right, this no has become six at this point. Um, let's look at statement number two. Statement number two is fairly interesting. Around six of you told me yes, and around nine of you told me no. It cannot be inferred. Let's quickly move to statement three, and oops, and let's very quickly. These statements were a little more easy. I see. So statement three, two of you told me yes, and 13 of you told me no, and statement four also overwhelming no. So good results, good results. So I can see that statements one and two kind of created a certain level of confusion, which we don't see with the rest of it. Okay. Let me see. All right, I don't see any comments there. This point should be clear. So what are the answers here? Of course, statement one is a valid inference. So nine of you got it right, but six of you did not get it right. So it tells me that there are some points here that may not be crystal clear. Statement two again was very interesting. It says all the tigers in the circus were rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. I think the conceptual point that you're not getting for some of you is the same. It's definitely, I mean, here, of course, yes, it is a valid inference. Statement two, it's not a valid inference. We're going to see why. Statement three, I'm happy to see so many of you got it right. It's not a valid inference. And likewise with statement four, yet again, it's not a valid inference. So it looks like the first two statements might have caused a certain level of confusion in this small batch. So let's figure it out. So what is visualization? Remember, understanding all those nuances. If you read it like a storybook, you're going to miss some of these words. This is a simple example, but we are going to build up to harder examples with full length questions. So here's how you do it. All the tigers in Joe's sanctuary were rescued from the circus in 2019. So all the tigers in Joe's sanctuary. So there is this Joe's sanctuary. There are tigers there. Let's put a number to it to understand the idea very easy. I like using numbers in CR. So let's say there are 10 tigers in Joe's sanctuary. What does this sentence mean? All of these 10 tigers or in other words, each and every one of these 10 tigers, they were rescued from the circus. Now we don't know what the circus is. Some circus which is referred as the circus. Is it X circus, Y circus? We don't know. Whatever it's referring to. From the circus, specifically in 2019, not any other year. It means that these tigers were rescued in 2019. We don't know which year we are in right now. Okay. Now, what I really want you to understand here is when it comes to rescued from the circus, how many number of tigers are there in the circus, which eventually some of them were rescued, some of them may not have been rescued. You don't know whether this number is 10. In reality, the number of tigers in the circus in 2019 might have been 100, it might have been 10, it might have been 1000. You don't know what it is. All you know is each and every tiger which is in Joe's sanctuary, it was rescued from the circus. But you don't know if there were more tigers in the circus. Is that clear? Is this coming through? Because if I look at sentence one and sentence two, I can see that a lot of you got it wrong. A good chunk of you got sentence one and sentence two wrong. End of the day, Enzo is a tiger in Joe's sanctuary. What do you know about Enzo? Enzo being a tiger in Joe's sanctuary, what do you know about tigers in Joe's sanctuary? All the tigers, each and every tiger in Joe's sanctuary, that means including Enzo, were rescued from the circus in 2019. Now, statement 1 does not mention 2019, but is it required? Whether even if it's not mentioned in that it was rescued in 2019, at the end of the day, is it not correct to say this particular tiger called Enzo, it was rescued from the circus? Just so happened that it was in 2019. 2019 does not have to be mentioned, but it is still the correct answer. For those of you who went wrong here and told me that, hey, statement 1 is not a valid inference, can you still tell me why? I would like to understand that. Because what was that element that you missed? Because there were quite a few of you who missed this. Right? The word all is very important. All the tigers in Joe's sanctuary, meaning each and every tiger in Joe's sanctuary, whether it is Enzo, whether it is any other name, all of them were rescued from the circus in 2009. Even if in 2009 is not mentioned here, it doesn't change a thing. End of the day, they were rescued from the circus. All from the argument. Statement 1 did not specify. That's also an important learning, right? Does it have to specify from 2000 in 2009? Even otherwise, you cannot dispute. If I tell you that they were rescued from the circus, you cannot say that's incorrect. No, they were rescued from the circus. Just that the author has the statement does not give you the additional info that it's in 2019. That does not make statement 1 incorrect. So Varsha says, for me, it was the year. If the specific time frame was not there, how do we know when Enzo came in? Here's the thing. They were rescued in 2019. End of the day, they were rescued. Which year they were rescued in does not change the fact that they were rescued from the circus, right? Think about this. So, Beat says because statement 1 did not specify any year, so both of you had the same point. So I can see that a lot of you fell for this fact that in 2019 was not mentioned here. This is important because when it comes to answer choice analysis in a full-length GMAT kind of question, these are the same errors that you might make, right? Think, did I have to mention in 2019 for statement 1 to be correct? End of the day, it was rescued from the circus, just that it happened in 2019. That does not make statement 1 incorrect, right? Enzo's a specific case. You're right, Pramod, of course. So now let's discuss statement 2. I think statement 1 seems clear. Statement 2, all the tigers in the circus were rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary in 2019. Definitely not a valid inference because look at the example that we took. Maybe for all you know, for all I know, only 10 tigers were, Joe's sanctuary has only 10 tigers. All 10 of them were rescued, yes, from the circus, but the circus may have had 100 tigers even in 2019. The circus had 100 tigers in 2019. Only 10 of them were rescued. Those 10 that were rescued may have ended up in Joe's sanctuary. Therefore, all the tigers in Joe's sanctuary came from the circus. It does not mean that all the 100 tigers were rescued and put in the Joe's sanctuary. Here, for example, 10 of these 100 tigers, they were rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. 90 out of the 100 tigers were not rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. So, is this clear? I mean, again, there was a good chunk of you who actually went wrong in statement 2. Can any of you let me know, if this clears things, what was the confusion earlier? Very useful because these are the simple logical inference kind of errors that can happen on the main exam also, not just in inference questions, even in assumption questions, evaluate, strengthen, weaken. The same principles apply for answer choice analysis. So those of you who fell for statement 2 and went wrong in statement 2, just register that. Meanwhile, let's move to statement 3. Diego, a tiger from the circus, was rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. I was happy to see that Most of you did not fall for this. End of the day, you know that Diego is a tiger from the circus. So for all you know, Diego is one of these 90 tigers which did not get rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. Diego could be from this 10, but you cannot be sure. You have no idea was whether Diego was a tiger who got rescued or Diego was a tiger in the circus in 2019 which never got rescued. You have no idea. So statement 3 is not a valid inference. Let's talk about statement 4 at this point. Again, very happy to see a lot of you did not fall for this. End of the day, not all tigers from the circus in 2019 were rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary. Again, not necessary. The important learning here is, even if you take an example, be happy to break that example if necessary. For all we know, for all I know, Joe's sanctuary has 10 tigers. All 10 of them were rescued from the circus in 2019, and maybe the circus had only 10 tigers. So the circus had 10 tigers. All 10 of them were rescued and put in Joe's sanctuary in 2019. So can you confidently say that not all tigers were rescued? Maybe, maybe not. You have no idea. And which makes, and this is what makes statement 4 not a valid inference. You cannot say with 100% certainty that not all tigers were rescued. For all we know, each and every tiger was also rescued. So very quickly, is this clear? Just want to get a general sense to make sure that we are through and everything is clear. Then we can move on to the first OG question of the day. All right. Thanks, Taha. Thanks, Arun. That makes me sure that okay, you guys are here, you guys are following it, because I know it's late for a lot of you. All right, so now let's get into the takeaways from this particular question. Again, some small takeaways, some quick takeaways. You're going to see this more and more, but visualizing sentence is a fundamental skill in CR, but also from somebody who also handles RC, also for RC. But first, let's focus on CR in this session. Um, Now you kind of know what I mean by visualization. Each and every aspect is important. A word like all can change the meaning. The interpretation of all, the interpretation of some or most simple examples, but even a word like the being replaced by a can cause a change in the meaning. And if you read it like a storybook, you may not even catch that. So we're going to see all this and more. This is something that I like to tell students. You don't need it for every sentence, but as the sentences get more difficult, if you're not able to figure out what the sentence really means, try coming up with an example. Remember, even in school, there's a reason why we are taught things using examples. Examples stick to your head. We learn things through examples. So if you see a very complex sentence and you're not able to figure out make head or tail out of it, it's a good practice. Sometimes you'll be benefited by trying to come up with a simple example. For me, here the examples were 10 tigers versus 100 tigers, or 10 versus 10. Simple examples which help me understand that sentence very, very concretely. All right. Uh, and even in this case, if you had this level of visualization, answering those answer choices would have been much easier, will be much easy. All right. So now let's go to the first OG question of the day. And you're going to solve two questions together. This is like a sprint. I have a 2A version, which is the original question. I also have a 2B version with some option choices that we created. So it should be a little bit of fun doing both. So first, let's do question 2A and then let's discuss. And then I'll share you question 2B, rather. All the best. All right, I can see that most of you are done. Let's take another 10 seconds and then begin discussing this. All right, last 3 seconds. Three, two, one, and let's stop. Let me just look at the last numbers that you guys have for me. All right. Very interesting. Very interesting. So, any comments? What did you guys feel about this entire set of questions? Rishabh, to answer your question, are these 600 plus? These are actually 700 plus. The first question, of course, is an actual OG question. If you check it out on GMAT Club, you'd see somewhere in the 30 to 40 kind of accuracy. It's considered 700 plus. If you found it easier, I'm very happy for you. Uh, Varsha, it was interesting because the answers could have been interpreted in multiple ways, contributing to the issue, which would have been a true statement otherwise. This is what makes the effort successful. Yes. So this question is a very good exercise in how precision can help with CR, especially when it comes to assumption questions. There's a certain precision that should be there because an assumption has to be, it has to meet this criteria called must be true. An assumption has to be true for your conclusion to hold true. So it adds a certain level of precision, which is very interesting. Second version, confused between A and D. All right, all right. So we're going to discuss both of these questions, but first we're going to discuss the argument itself. Um, let's get right to it. Yeah. So again, what is the argument? To reduce traffic congestion. All right. This is Transportation Bureau of CTX. There's a plan. The plan is to encourage people working downtown to sign a certain pledge, or in other words, you're making a promise. A pledge is like a promise, right? What is this promise? I'll do carpooling. I'll use public transportation for the next year. And then you have that motivational character or incentive. Everyone who signs the form will get a coupon for a free meal at any downtown restaurant. So here's my first question for you. What is the conclusion of this argument? Remember, you have to find an assumption. It's an assumption question. You need to find some assumption. But to do that, you need to find the conclusion. What is the conclusion here? Orgy Christiana, write to us. Write to us at support at GMAT. We may be able to help you. Write to us at support at eGMAT.com. We should be able to help you out with that. The traffic will reduce by the plan. Okay, that's fair. You're right. Essentially, the conclusion of the argument is fairly simple. It's in the question stem, as some of you definitely figured out. For the Transportation Bureau's plan to succeed in reducing traffic congestion, which of the following must be true? Right? City is trying to reduce traffic congestion. Yes, of course. So the conclusion of the argument, or in other words, the central claim that the author of the argument makes is, hey, there is this plan. This plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion. I'm sure everybody is clear so far. Now, what do I mean by visualization of a statement like this? What does it mean when you say the plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion? I want you to pay attention to this point. Remember, the conclusion does not say your statement for your plan to succeed, your traffic congestion need not reduce by a considerable margin. You don't need a 50%, 60%, or a 150% reduction. Even a peanut size reduction in traffic congestion will work. That's something that I really, this is what is visualization. You're understanding each and every aspect. So when you say that the plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion, what does it mean when you say to reduce traffic congestion? It's not necessary that it's a significant margin. Peanuts is fine. Even a 1%, 0.1% traffic congestion reduction is a traffic congestion reduction. This is the first point that I want you to absorb. Now, if you did not intrinsically figure this out at this point. Some of you might still have figured it out when you were doing answer choice analysis. But if you figure it out right here, you would not even be confused with the answer choices. And I'm going to show that. So this is step one. Conclusion is clear. The plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion, or in other words, it just has to succeed. It just has to reduce traffic congestion. Peanuts is okay. Even a 1%, 2% is okay. It doesn't have to be 70%. Okay. That's how you internalize it. That's my way of remembering this. I actually use the word peanuts in my brain at this point. Now, let's move to the next point. There is a particular plan, right? And you guys have figured out what this plan is. What is this plan? You're encouraging people who are working in this place called downtown to sign a certain pledge that they will do carpooling and public transportation for the next year. Now, each of these points is important. If you're reading it like a storybook, some of these aspects may not even register in your brain. You might be reading it, but your brain may not be processing it. I'll show you why this is important. Now, firstly, I hope this was very clear. When you say people who work downtown, let's say this is city X. This entire thing is city X. Downtown could be just this one area. This area is downtown. What is the plan here? You're encouraging the people who are working in this place called downtown, which is one part of the city, to sign a certain pledge. And that pledge says, hey, I'm going to do carpooling and public transport, not just for one day or one event. It's not like I'm pledging to, come by, I'm pledging to do carpooling for going to a Beyonce concert or something. It's not like that. I'm pledging to follow, to do carpooling or public transportation for a whole year. Now, here's the thing that I want you to ask yourself. Did you pick up each of these aspects? Now, for example, encourage. I'm just encouraging people. I'm not mandating people. I'm not making it compulsory. That's one point. You're only talking about people who are working downtown. But the entire plan is about reducing the overall city's traffic congestion. It's not about downtown traffic congestion. It's about city level traffic congestion. So why specifically this group of people who are working downtown? Your brain had to think about that. If you do not focus on downtown, this entire thing went by your head. Now, a pledge is just a promise. Will people abide by the pledge is something you need to think about. And this entire thing is for the next year. I'm not giving a commitment that I will, do carpooling and come to a particular concert or a particular event. It's for an entire year that I'm giving this commitment. I hope you guys got all these points when you were reading this sentence, when you figured out what the plan is. That's visualization. Okay. Now, let's get into the pre-thinking point, because it will show you how visualization ties with pre-thinking and how it will really help once we will get to answer choice analysis. So pre-thinking, like I said, you're coming up with one idea, one valid idea in a few seconds once you've truly understood the argument. We've understood the argument. The conclusion is, argument in essence is conclusion and logic used to arrive at the conclusion. Conclusion is that the plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion, which means even a peanut-sized reduction is okay. The plan is encouraging people working downtown to sign a pledge, carpooling for the next year. The motivational carrot, of course, every single person, everyone, similar to the example that we saw, right? Each and every person who signs this form, who takes this pledge, in other words, will get a free meal coupon for one free meal at any downtown restaurant. All these points, if you're reading very, very quickly, your brain is not gonna process all these things. But if you practice reading slowly, you'll catch all these things and still be able to solve the question within 2 minutes. Done right. Okay. So now, what is this pre-thinking? We need to think about a one very solid idea at the very least. Here's all you need to know at this point about pre-thinking. If you're interested in understanding pre-thinking at a much higher level, you can attend our seminars. We're going to have a seminar in a couple of weeks. But here's the thing. End of the day, what you're doing in pre-thinking is analyzing the argument and its logic. And if you want to analyze an argument and its logic cogently, what is it you should do? You should kind of figure out what are the weak points in the argument. Where is the argument actually breaking down? Figure out where your argument breaks down. You will be able to arrive at very, very solid pre-thinking scenarios. So just take that from me at this point, that for every question when we are doing pre-thinking, we are going to try to break down the conclusion. Or in other words, we are going to try to find situations where your conclusion is not going to hold true. So one quick example is this question. How does it work? My conclusion is that the plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion. So My pre-thinking question, very simple. When will this plan not reduce traffic congestion even by 1%, even by peanuts? The difference is when you have this clarity, it becomes part of this question and it creates a layer of precision in your idea also. I'm sure a lot of you who chose the correct answer, you had the right idea in mind. What if people don't abide by the pledge? You have people signing the pledge, but what if people don't abide by the pledge? But then you'll see that you had to analyze option A and option C and then option E. All of them were talking about abiding, people abiding by the pledge, right? That's because you haven't framed the right question. You haven't had this precision. If you just had a very broad idea that what if people don't abide, in reality, let's answer this question. When will this plan not reduce traffic congestion even by peanuts? Given that there is this plan, it's about encouraging people who work downtown to sign this particular pledge. Now, can anybody give me a scenario? This is the question that I've given you. Can we have one or two answers? Let's see if we have some answers. One or two. Let's see. Given this question, let's see some one or two answers for this question. I see some good answers already. Manorama says no one works at downtown. Actually, that's a very valid scenario. It's not what I have here, but absolutely valid. You're assuming that there are people who work downtown whom you can approach for a pledge. What if there are no such people? It may be a very far-fetched scenario. You typically have at least some people living in this place called downtown, but very theoretically, it's also perfectly valid. Uh, Ajay Kumar says when people don't abide. Correct idea, but I'm going to show you a certain level of precision in that idea. Mani Heman says no traffic originates from downtown. Beautiful. That's fantastic. Taha says because you're trying to find out what must be true. Traffic congestion in the city is not caused due to people working downtown. Absolutely. Now here's the thing. If you focused on all these things, you would pick up ideas. Now, Manorama said, what if there is nobody who even works downtown? Aren't we assuming that there are people who work downtown? That might seem like a far-fetched idea, but very technically, that's also possible. Why? Because we focused on this word downtown. You figured out that downtown matters. Let's talk about other things. You look at this word, yeah. You look at this word encourage. Again, as we ask that question, just because you're going behind people, asking them or trying to encourage them to sign this pledge, it's not necessary that not even one person signs this pledge. Just like Manorama said, what if nobody works downtown? It's perfectly possible that not even one person signs this pledge. I mean, think about it. For one free meal, with one free meal as an incentive, one free meal at a restaurant as an incentive, you're asking me to take a pledge to do carpooling for an entire year. It doesn't even seem like a great deal. Besides the point, but how do you know even one person will sign this pledge? That's a point. One of the other points that came from this group, I saw this answer here, and this came from focusing on the downtown. How do we know that these guys are contributing to traffic congestion problem? What if 0% of traffic congestion comes from people working downtown? How is that possible? For example, maybe the people working downtown, everything they need is within walking distance. These guys are not even taking their vehicles, or they might already be using public bus. Not even one person might be contributing to the traffic congestion problem here. That's also possible. Another very interesting thing, and this is what a lot of you thought about, like what if people don't abide? Here's the thing. That's correct, the idea is correct, but it's not as precise. The precise version is, when will my when will this plan not succeed in reducing traffic congestion even by peanuts? That will happen if not even a single person who signs this pledge abides by this pledge even once in the next year. Remember, it's for a whole year. Because your brain process pledge and year, you thought about this. You'll be able to think about this. Think about it. You're asking a commitment from a person for a whole year. What if not even a single person who signs this pledge not even once in their life in the next year abides by this pledge or actually does carpooling public transport. Will my conclusion still hold true? Can the author still claim that the plan will succeed in reducing traffic congestion? The answer is no. The conclusion will break down. If you're able to arrive at even one in the real exam scenario, even one is sufficient. One good solid scenario is sufficient because your brain has done a little bit of processing. You analyze the question, you analyze the universe of the problem well. But realistically, you'll always be able to get a lot more things. Now, some of you might be wondering, is this point useful about this free meal? Is there something happening here? Can you arrive at a condition based on free meal? For example, what if those who sign the pledge, they do not use the free coupon? You have to ask the question, is this really required? Do we really care about whether these people use the coupon or they don't use the coupon? The coupon is just that incentive, right? End of the day, the only thing that matters is whether these people abide by the pledge, yes or no. Whether they utilize the free meal coupon and go and eat at a restaurant, whether they don't eat at the restaurant, nobody cares. It has nothing to do with reducing traffic congestion. So a scenario like that would not be valid. What you'll realize is the core logic is here. Everything, this one is just a dangler. It's important to understand that, because otherwise an answer choice that's talking about whether people prefer free meal coupons, yes or no, it's going to be a confusing option choice. So if this is clear, then the assumption is very, very clean. Once you've arrived at these, what I call as conclusion breakdown scenarios, the scenarios where your conclusion, the weak points in the argument, once you figure that out by pre-thinking, just by simply negating it, you'll arrive at assumption ideas, right? What if not even one person signs the pledge? So the assumption is at least some of these people sign the pledge. For the assumption that came from the group, when what Manorama pointed out, what if nobody works downtown? So the underlying assumption is at least some people work downtown. That's also required for this pledge, for this plan to work. What if people who work downtown are contributing 0%? So what's the assumption there? At least some amount of traffic congestion has to be, some non-zero amount of traffic congestion is caused by these people who are working downtown. Otherwise, what are you doing with a plan going to encourage these people? If they're not contributing to traffic congestion, what are you doing there is the question. What if not even a single person who signs the pledge abides by the pledge even once in the next year? This translates to, if you negate it, at least some people or at least one person who signs the pledge will at least once in a while, say at least one time, abide by that pledge and do carpooling public transport sometime in the next year. Only then can you expect traffic congestion to reduce in the next year. So a little bit of clarity coming through on how the visualization piece tied into the pre-thinking piece, and how this pre-thinking gave us three very, very solid assumptions. Four, if I include what came from the group as well. So I see some comments. Yes, Ishani, when not even a single person abides by the pledge. Perfect. That's the precision that an assumption question requires. When Ravi says people take coupon, eat and move on and don't abide. Yeah, see, whether they eat or don't eat doesn't matter. Whether they abide or don't abide, that matters for this argument. Nobody is interested, of course, if people don't follow it. That's the very general idea, but this precise version is what you should be able to arrive at. Now that is pre-thinking. What if Anuj asked an interesting question? What if the incentive is not attractive for the people? See, even if it's not attractive, out of my sense of environmental duty, I might still abide by the pledge. So it's not good enough for an assumption. Yeah, that's a good question. What if this is not motivation enough? If it leads to me not signing the pledge, that's valid. But otherwise, even if your incentive is not good enough, out of my own sense of goodwill, I might still sign this pledge. I might still not do carpooling I might still do carpooling once in a while. So for an assumption, that would not work. So how are we? Any questions? Anything that's not clear? I hope you're getting a feel for all these aspects. What I really want you to pay attention to is all these things. Granular attention in visualizing these aspects give rise to organic ideas. When you say encourage, that gives you an idea. When you say downtown, that gives you an idea. But when you're reading it like a storybook, you will never catch all these nuances. You would only think about the broad idea, what if people don't abide? Okay? I hope you're getting that point here. So Now let's come to the A version. But before that, let me quickly tell you what the accuracy stats are. Let me. I had already put that in. Yeah, 42% of folks got the right answer, which is option E. Option C and option A were popular, 17%, 30%. So option A got around 17%, option C got around 30%, and around 42% of you chose option E. Option E is the correct answer. But what I want you to do right now is compare option E with our pre-thought idea. Now you should be able to see why this seems to be the correct answer. Think about it. At least some people who receive the coupon for a free meal will sometimes carpool or use public transportation during the next year. All these words are important. You might wonder, what is the difference here? I'm talking about people signing the pledge. This is talking about people who receive the coupon for a free meal. If you got confused here, then this is the word that you did not pay attention to. Remember, if you got a coupon for a free meal, by de facto that means that you signed this form. Everyone who signs the form will get a free meal coupon. These are the people who get, the people who sign the pledge are the people who are getting the free meal coupon. So people who receive the coupon for a free meal practically translates to people who sign the pledge. Now, what does option E say? At least some people who sign the pledge, at least sometimes, at least once, they will do carpooling or use public transportation. When? During the next year. The time frame is also important. It's not just one event, it's for the whole year. Make sense? Do you guys see why option E is the correct answer? Quick show of hands, yes, no. Just want to ensure that, for those of you who did not choose, because less than 50% of the people here who participated got this correct answer, and we're talking about around 27, 28 responses here. So I want to make sure that before we get into the incorrect choices, I want to make sure that you understand why this correct choice is correct. So quick show of hands, is this clear? Beast, thank you for that confirmation. Anybody else? Is it that Beast is the only one who got it, or Beast is the only one who's replying? End of the day, Varsha, thanks for that. Eliminating the weakest argument helped. Okay, that's good. Some learning there, I hope. So, option E, I hope you see why it's right. Now, let's also go through each and every option. And again, you also have to figure out why, if you really want to learn and see where you're faltering, you need to analyze each and every answer choice in detail properly. So, let's do that. Let's look at option A, which was chosen by 17% of students here. At least some people who sign the pledge will fully abide by the pledge last for the next year. I believe this I might have I just want to check if I gave you the right answer choice here. Yes, this was everyone, right? Okay. I believe in this case for 2A it was everyone. I believe this one was everyone. And this is why a lot of you found it easy to reject, right? But here's a question. Do you need everyone who signed the pledge to fully abide by the pledge? The option A says everyone who signed the pledge will fully abide by the pledge for the next year. Think about it. Do you need, and remember the conclusion, you just want to reduce traffic congestion. It's okay it's okay if traffic congestion reduces even by a tiny amount. So do you really need everyone who signs the pledge to abide by the pledge? The answer should be no. For those of you who are wondering why even at least some is wrong, at least some is great, but do you need people to fully abide by the pledge? What if 10% of the people who sign the pledge abide by the pledge only 10% of the time? Even if 10% of the people who sign the pledge abide by the pledge just 10% of the time, you should still see traffic reduction. And your conclusion is about your conclusion is about what? Reducing traffic congestion. It does not have to be a significant margin. So A is not a valid assumption. It does not satisfy your must be true category criteria, right? Let's look at option B. Negation of everyone is at least one. So it's not many or most. Anuj, it's not many, it's not most, it's only some. So if you negate everyone, it means at least someone, at least one. So good question. I mean, good point, but you need to be extremely clear there. Um, Negation of at least some is none. Right, right. If I'm saying that at least some people will do something, the negation of that is nobody will do it. Think beyond grammar, think in terms of logic. If I say that at least some people will like apples, and if you say what is the negation of that, it means the negation of at least some people like apples is nobody likes apples. I hope that point is coming through. So that's a good question. So now let's move on. Let's look at option B. At least some people who work downtown prefer the restaurants downtown to those elsewhere. Think, think. Do is it necessary? Does this preference really matter? Do these restaurants really matter? What we figured out is it does not matter whether they like these restaurants. It does not matter whether they eat at these restaurants. Whether you eat at the restaurant or don't eat at the restaurant, nobody cares. Whether you prefer this restaurant or do not prefer this restaurant, again, nobody cares. Your conclusion is about reduction in traffic congestion. That means whether people will abide by that pledge or not. Option B, therefore, should be easy to reject only because it's completely irrelevant. Now let's look at option C. Again, a very interesting answer choice. This was the most popular incorrect choice. Over 20% of you chose this. In 29, 30% of you chose option C. Most downtown traffic congestion results from people who work downtown. Again, the easiest way to reject, you need to have a death grip on conclusion when you're analyzing your answer choices. If all I need to do is reduce traffic congestion, even by 1% is okay. Do you even need most congestion to come from people working downtown? The other layer is downtown traffic congestion. Do they have to contribute to downtown traffic congestion? That's another point. But let's look at just most. Do you need most traffic congestion or downtown traffic congestion to come from the people who are working downtown? What if only 10% of traffic congestion comes from people who are working downtown? Even then, can the plan not work? 10% of traffic congestion, let's say it's coming from people who work downtown. I'm giving this, I'm encouraging people who are working downtown. Some of them actually follow my pledge once in a while. My traffic congestion will still reduce. So why does option C not work? Because it's not must be true. It is not an absolute must for your conclusion to hold true. Or in other words, even when you negate option C, your answer, your conclusion does not necessarily break. So very quick show of hands, is option C clear? That's the easiest way to reject option C, but you also have to look at the word downtown, by the way. You imagine, just because people are working downtown does not mean they're contributing to traffic in downtown. The conclusion is about overall citywide traffic reduction. So, do the people who work downtown, what if they're contributing to traffic outside downtown? Maybe within downtown, all they do is walk or they use public bus when they are in downtown, but outside downtown when they're roaming around these areas, there they use their cars. In such a case, is it necessary that most downtown traffic congestion comes from people who work downtown? Not at all necessary. You don't need any level of traffic congestion from these guys at all in downtown. So, very quick show of hands. Is the logic of most clear? That's the core point I want you to take away. The downtown thing is also there, but that's honestly the deeper logic. I've written an article about it. You can check it out. It's one of our blog articles where I get into that downtown aspect also. But let's just look at that most aspect. Does most traffic congestion, do you need that to be true? All right. Now let's go to option D. I think option C is clear. If there's something still not clear, let me know. I'll help you out. Option D is one of the easier choices to reject. The most effective way to reduce traffic congestion downtown would be to persuade more people who are working there to do carpooling or public transport. Looks like a complex sentence, but if you actually simplify it, end of the day, it comes down to this. Essentially, this particular plan, that is persuading people who work downtown to do carpooling public transportation, option D says that this plan is the most effective way to reduce traffic congestion. The question is, does it have to be the most effective way? What if it's not the most effective way? Maybe it is the least effective way. Out of 10 possible ways to reduce traffic congestion, this particular plan is the worst of all. It's the least effective. But even if it is the least effective, remember your conclusion. You only need to reduce traffic congestion. As long, even if it's the least effective, if it reduces traffic congestion only by 2%, even then your conclusion will hold true. The plan will still succeed, which is why you should not choose option D. Now, very quick takeaways before I move on. You would have understood visualizing the conclusion is critical. You have a death grip on the conclusion. Rejecting answer choice A, C, and D, very, very easy. And organically figuring out why E is correct is also easy. Why did I reject A? Because I don't need everyone. I don't need fully abide. Why? Because my conclusion says I only need to reduce traffic congestion. It doesn't have to be a considerable margin. Visualizing the conclusion, vital. You should have it in your brain when you're doing answer choice analysis. That's a point of failure with a lot of students. A lot of students forget the conclusion by the time they're doing answer choice analysis. You might be faltering here if you failed in this question. Okay, crystal clear clarity on the conclusion. We understood that very important aspect. Pre-thinking, the way we have done it, very natural. You focused on those aspects, those ideas just popped out when you asked the right question. When will my congestion not come down even by peanuts? What if none of these people who signed the pledge abide by it even once in the next year? Pop. That's how it should be. All right. We also looked into negation test, very important for assumption questions. Whenever you see tricky answer choices in assumption questions, use the negation test. We used it for option A and C. Why do you need most? Why do you need everyone? Why do you need fully abide? What if it's not fully abide? What if only 10% of people only 10% of the time? That is us negating the situation and seeing if the conclusion breaks. As always, when needed, you can always use examples to understand things. So very quickly, we have already discussed this point, option A, because I had put a typo there. I had used this option earlier also. End of the day, do you need at least some people? That's great. This point, this particular aspect is great. Let me quickly give you a quick idea about the accuracy for the version 2 of our question, because again, very, very interesting stats there. Just over 50% of us got it right. A and C were popular answer choices. So, okay. So A was popular, C was popular, D around 50%, a little over 50%, 51% of you got it right. D, by the way, is the correct answer here. Taha, it's not an inference question. Inference, given the information in the passage, what is true? That is an inference. Assumption is for this some particular claim to hold true, what must be true? That's an assumption. This is an assumption question. We will be sharing the PDF at that point. You should go through this question again. You'll get the entire picture there. For a claim to hold true, what must be true? That's an assumption question. Given the information, what is definitely true? That's an inference question. So this is an assumption question. So option A at this point should be clear, because why do you need at least some people? Rather, why do you need fully abide? At least some people is great, but your pre-thinking is very razor sharp and crystal clear. At least some people, at least sometimes in the next year will follow the pledge. You don't need fully abide here. That one word makes this entire answer A wrong. Answer A was very, very popular. It was one of the two popular incorrect choices. You guys just saw at least some. You might have chosen option E in the previous version. You thought that it's exactly same to same. Did that happen with any of you? Please let me know, because usually that's what happens. In the last question, option E was correct. You figured it out after a lot of effort. Here you saw the same words, but there is this one word called fully which changes everything. And if you don't catch fully, there's no way you're going to get this right. Option B, at least some people who did not receive the coupon for a free meal will sometimes carpool. So I was happy to see that most of you have not chosen this, but the logic here is clear. It's talking about people who did not receive the coupon. This entire plan is about people who sign the pledge and receiving the coupon. The conclusion is about whether this plan will succeed. For this plan to succeed, it has to be about people who are actually signing this pledge, or in other words, people who are receiving this coupon. Option B is exactly the correct answer if not for this one word. If this word not was not there, option E was this option is the exact same correct answer from the last question. There is no way, right? Here this word not makes it completely incorrect because the conclusion is about the people who signed the pledge. The plan is about those people, whether thanks to them this plan will actually succeed. What is option B saying? It's talking about people who did not receive the coupon, or in other words, people who did not sign the pledge, whether they carpool or not. Even if these guys start carpooling and somehow contribute to reducing traffic congestion, it would not be considered the success of the plan. The success of the plan is predicated on people who signed the pledge. Okay, so I think this point was fairly clear. Option C, again, the very popular incorrect choice. I see a lot of you have chosen this. Now here's the thing: an effective way to reduce traffic congestion would be to persuade people who work downtown to use carpooling or public transport. With this clarity on conclusion, now you should be able to reject this immediately. So for those of you who chose option C, there's quite a lot of you. Please let me know what happened here. Why did you fall? Did you learn something from this exercise right now? End of the day, option C tells you that this plan is effective. But again, to reduce traffic congestion, just to reduce traffic congestion, does it have to be effective? The answer is no. So that's option C. Option D here is actually the correct answer. And you would have realized it's one more of our pre thought ideas. At least some traffic congestion in the city must be coming from people who work downtown. Otherwise, this entire plan is useless. What are you doing trying to encourage people working downtown to do carpooling if they're not contributing to traffic congestion at all? Simple, right? So option D, of course, is the correct answer, but only 50% of you chose this, which is something that you should understand. So option E here is the same option B of the last question. So very easy to reject, I'd say. It's the same logic. What do we care whether they'll eat at these restaurants or not? What do we care whether they prefer these restaurants or not? Either way, it doesn't matter. So very quickly before we move on, any quick learnings, any feedback, anything that you understood that you didn't earlier before, please let me know. Quick takeaways from this. Again, even the tiny word, that option, this option B in this particular version, it was correct except for this one word not. Read it like a storybook, you're not going to catch this on the actual exam where you do not have a 2A version, right? The pre-thinking was actually the same, but because you understood the argument at that level, the answer choice analysis, you didn't have to rethink things. Otherwise, if answer choice analysis is what all there is to, solving a CR argument, you'd have to do a lot of analysis again to answer this question. But if you have done argument analysis well, if you visualize the statements well, if you have done your pre-thinking, then whatever options I throw at you, whatever option the test throws at you, you should be able to handle most of it. We also looked specifically at negation. When you're doing negation, the one thing I would say is don't focus so much on grammar. Don't say like at least some, so it has to be none. No, think logically. Think very logically. What is the idea being communicated, and then logically negate it. If the idea being communicated is that at least some people like apples, then what is the logical negation? Nobody likes apples. Simple. You have to keep it that simple, right? All right. So now we are ready to go to the next question. Let's get those answers in. I'll give you a little more time. I can see that some of you are still thinking about this one, but let's move fast. All right, folks. So last 10 seconds, and then let's discuss. I think most of you are done. All right. So three, two, one, and all right. So let's quickly look at the results. How have we done? Oh, not bad. So roughly I see 70% accuracy here, which is fair. It's par for the course for this question. The question as such is not too difficult, as some of you might have figured out. uh, but this is still a question that I like to put here because you might have understood the right idea, and option the correct answer would feel like the correct answer, but there are nuances there that you might not have caught, some of you at least. So we'll discuss. So there's some very interesting learning points here. So let's go step by step. How do you break down, how do you read these extra wordy arguments? This is an example of an argument that's actually long, right? How do you uh, make sure that you catch all the nuances without getting lost in all the words? So as Akash says, this is a simple passage. This question is not really 700 level, but it's high on learnings. That's why I have it here. Now, Vitex has developed a small diesel engine. Now, again, y- the reason I've highlighted small diesel is your brain should start processing those things. It's not just a diesel engine, it's a small diesel engine. It's not a petrol engine or a natural gas engine, it's a diesel engine. So you need to catch all these small, small nuances. So there is this company called Vitex, it's come up with a small diesel engine. So far, so good. This particular engine produces 30% less particulate pollution than the engine made by its main rival once. So, two data points that are coming through here. So, you have Vitex and you have Once. What do I know about Once? Once is the main rival for Vitex. That's one data point that you got. Also, the Vitex engine seems to be kind of good as far as pollution is concerned. It's kind of clean performance. 30% less particulate emission. So, I like using numbers to understand this, but you could understand it either way. Essentially, if the in terms of particulate pollution units, let's say has 100 unit particulate pollution, that means that this would be 70, or in other words 30% less. So far so good. Now let's move on. Once, now widely used in Marania. You always have to ask the question, what does it mean when you say widely used? What is the intent, what is it that the author is trying to tell you? When I say widely used, it means one thing. There is a certain level of popularity which this particular engine enjoys currently. That's what it means, right? When you say widely used, it has a certain level of popularity. It's not an One's is not some engine that nobody cares about in Marania. No, there are people or businesses that actually buy this. It's widely used. That is the subtext that the author wants you to pick up. Don't just read, figure out these nuances. What is the author really trying to say? That's visualization. In other words, I'm expressing this idea in my own words. That way, it sticks to my head. It doesn't go out of my head when I'm doing answer choice analysis. Okay. Vitex engine is well suited for use in the thriving warehousing businesses in Marania. Fairly straightforward. Again, ask the question, what is meant by well suited for use? Again, in other words, If this product is in the market, you can expect a certain level of popularity, a certain level of demand. There are at least certain businesses, these warehousing businesses very specifically, which will definitely be benefited by an engine like Vitex, right? Well suited for use. It's not a, in other words, Vitex, if it enters the Maranian market, it's not going to be a useless product which nobody buys. You can expect a certain level of demand for a product like this. It's really well suited. That's what the author is trying to tell you. These warehousing businesses are not shutting down anytime soon. They are thriving. So they're doing very, very well. That's again something that the author wants you to pick up. It's just one word, but the thriving is something your brain should register. Okay. Although it costs more than the one's engine. So in terms of cost, it's very clear. Definitely, Vitex is the more expensive engine. The author is acknowledging this as a fact. All right, I understand. Despite all these wonderful things, why the Vitex engine really does cost more than the one's engine. All right, so far so good. Now, let's continue with the argument. Right now, everything that we're discussing, it should be getting absorbed in your brain. I hope you got all these points even when you're doing your answer choice analysis. All these things were there in your brain. As the questions get more difficult, it's your ability to do this that is going to help you a lot. Okay. Now let's get into some more interesting territory. The Maranian government plans to ban within the next 2 years, very specific timeline there, the use of diesel engines with more than 80% of current diesel engine particulate emissions in Marania. Long sentence, but let's understand. So there is a plan to ban, or in other words, it's not yet done. This ban is not implemented yet. It's just a plan at this point. Within the next 2 years, the timeline is clear. The use of diesel engines, so you're still talking about Vitex, things like Vitex, which are diesel engines, with more than 80% of current diesel engine particulate emissions in Marania. Or in other words, there's probably a certain limit at this point. This is the current diesel engine particulate emissions that's acceptable in this country. In future, it's going to be 80% of C. What is going to happen? Anything that pollutes more than 80% of C is going to be banned. Anything that pollutes less than 80% of C is going to be accepted. That's what this means, right? The next line gives more context. And ones will probably not be able to retool its engine to reduce emissions to reach this target. The first piece of information you get from here is that the one's engine is not meeting this new target. The question you have to ask is it meeting the old target? Given the fact that it is widely used, it's reasonable to say that it must be meeting the norms currently. Otherwise, you cannot expect the engine to be so popular, widely used. But is it going to be able to meet the new criteria? That's what the author told. It's not meeting the new criteria, and there is nothing that can be done to make it meet the new criteria. They're probably not going to be able to change this engine enough to meet the new criteria. So again, you could understand this with numbers. So let's say, for example, we continuing with our example, one's engine was at 100, Vitex engine was at 70 in terms of units of pollution. Now, given that one's is currently widely used in Marania, you would expect it to meet the current criteria. So if the C, it is going to be either 100 or greater than 100, because it has to be at least 100. It cannot be, if the current diesel engine particulate emission is 80, then Marania being widely used at 100 does not make much sense. So it should typically be something 100 or above. I took a simple example to understand this. 110, let's say, is the current diesel engine particulate emission, the limit that's accepted now. So what's going to happen? In future, this is going to be 80% of 110. What does this actually translate to? 88. What does it mean for one's engine? One's engine is at 100, remember. One's is out. What does it mean for Vitex? Vitex is in. You might ask the question, is Vitex definitely in? Vitex, is it possible that Vitex will also not be able to meet the new criteria? Actually, it's not possible, because remember, the minimum here is C. If indeed this particular ones is widely used, then it must be within the limit. It must be within or at the current limit. So 100 is the bare minimum which you would assign for the current particulate emission. So 80% of 100 is still 80. Your Vitex engine at 70 is still going to make the cut. So end of the day, the author's argument is boiling down to one point. If this ban actually goes through, one's is out and Vitex is in. That's what I really want you to extract. This is what I call understanding the real logic. Everything else is important detail, but the real logic is this. Given the fact No, I mean, rather, let's come to the conclusion. That makes things more put things in perspective. So now you have the conclusion statement. This is where the author, after all this lengthy monologue, is actually making a conclusion. So if the ban is passed, the Vitex engine ought to sell well in Maranya after that time. Now, again, very, very interesting because there are so many layers here. Let's focus on this conclusion very specifically. If the ban is passed, the Vitex engine ought to sell well in Maranya after that time. Again, you have to figure out point number one. If the ban is passed, the author is not claiming that this ban is going to be passed or likely to be passed. He or she does not care whether this ban is passed. The conclusion they are making is hypothetical. Let's say that this ban is passed. Then the Vitex engine is expected to sell well. It's not a question of whether the ban gets passed or not. So if at all you thought about a, if you thought about an assumption which said that, hey, the author is assuming that the ban will be passed, you went wrong. That is not a valid assumption. Why? Because the conclusion tells you that the claim here is related to the situation if the ban is passed. Hypothetical. The second point that you should have got, and this is what I see a lot of students don't catch this, what the conclusion actually says is the author expects Vitex to sell well, ought to sell well. Ought to sell well is not the same as will sell well. Let me know if you caught this particular point. It's kind of important to see. Let me know. Did you catch ought to sell well? Yes or no? That's kind of important to understand. Very quickly, before we move on, I just wanted to get a quick sense. Did you catch ought to sell well? The author is not saying that Vitex will sell well. The author is only saying that Vitex is expected to sell well. Very quick show of hands. I just want to ensure that this is an important point. You should have caught this. Very good. So Varsha, you caught this. Manorama, you didn't catch it. I'll tell you why it matters. In this question, you might have got lucky and still chosen option E. But in reality, if your conclusion is that Vitex will sell well, if your conclusion is Vitex will sell well, then your option E, by the way, fails the negation test. The only reason option E is the correct answer is because the conclusion says expected to sell well, ought to sell well. Some of you might have found it by process of elimination that option E is the correct answer. Some of you would have, thought that in the end of the day, it's talking about the right idea. What if somebody else comes in? There, if you chose option E without figuring out this aspect of expect to sell well versus will sell well, you got lucky with option E when you chose option E. 70% of you got this, got the correct answer, but how many of you, I mean, I'm pretty sure I can already see quite a few no's here, right? Some of you did not catch this nuance. Technically, if you had done your negation test on option E with the understanding that Vitex will sell well, you will fail the negation test, and we'll come to that. We'll look at that very specifically. So I hope this point is clear. This is what I mean by truly visualizing the conclusion, understanding each and every aspect, each and every subtle nuance of that conclusion. That is visualization. Satvik, very good question. We are going to come to that right now in 2 minutes. We're going to discuss that option in detail, why it actually fails otherwise. There is a big difference. Okay, so same process. We understand the conclusion. We understood the argument. We visualized it. Now let's focus on doing that pre-thinking. The conclusion is that, hey, if this ban is passed, then you can expect Vitex to sell well after that time. That time means to after that point when the ban is passed. So what is my pre-thinking question? Again, keep it very simple. How do you break down your conclusion? Finding the weak point in your argument. That's what it is. So the question here is, when can you not expect Vitex to sell well, even if this ban actually gets passed? Keep in mind, given that, remember the logic that we figured out. If this ban goes through, then Vitex is definitely in, once is definitely out. And remember, once is the widely used player. It's at least one of the widely used players in this market. Now you have to understand what the author is trying to say. What is the author's logic here? The author expects Vitex to sell well because if this ban is passed, Vitex will be in once, which is the one of the popular widely used choices. It will not be allowed anymore. Or in other words, once exit is creating space for Vitex to fill, and therefore the author expects Vitex to fill this gap. That is the logic. Now this is really how you attack CR. You're figuring out the real logic, figuring out how to break those conclusions. Now, remember, you always have to keep in mind the information that you have understood. Hey, Vitex does cost more than once. You know that Vitex, it's not a useless product. It has you can expect a certain level of demand because it is well suited for at least some certain thriving businesses. Warehousing was an example. It's not a flop product. And Vitex is 30% less polluting. It is definitely a cleaner product than once. These are the other things that you should keep in your mind. So again, the same organic exercise. When do you not expect Vitex to sell well, even if this ban is passed? Given the logic here, the logic here is once will be banned, once ban will create that space for Vitex to fill. That's it. That's all is the logic. Which is why the most immediate logical gap that you think about, the most immediate organic pre-thinking that will come to mind is, what if some other third party comes up with an equally or even better product than Vitex to fill this gap? The entire logic of the argument depends on space being created for Vitex thanks to one's moving out. But what if somebody else comes in instead of Vitex with an even better product or at least equally good product in terms of being as popular, as as good in terms of the pollution limits, clean running, whatever it is? In such a case, can you still expect Vitex to sell well? So, Satvik, to answer your question, here's the point. Even if a third party comes up with a great product, Vitex can still sell well. It does not break your conclusion. If your conclusion is that Vitex will sell well, it fails the negation test. Why? Because even if somebody else comes up with a fantastic product, that does not mean that Vitex need not sell well. Vitex could still sell well. For example, once, let's say, had 80% of the market widely used. Now another fantastic product came in, and therefore Vitex also takes 40% of the market, and this new other person takes also 40% of the market, and Vitex maybe is just entering this market from 0% directly to 40% might be a fantastic increase in sales. Expected to sell well, it's really selling well. In other words, you're even if you're even if a third party does come in with a great product, Vitex could still sell well, which is why your negation test does not get passed if your conclusion is that Vitex will sell well. On the other hand, if your conclusion is that Vitex is expected to sell well, then remember the logic. The logic is that ones is going out and ones is the currently widely used party. Given that ones is going out and ones is creating space for Vitex, the author expects Vitex to come and fill this place. Now, if some other party comes in with a fantastic product, can you still expect Vitex to sell that well? The expectation you cannot have. In reality, it may still sell well. So, is this clear, Satvik and others who had this doubt? Is this point clear? Please put a yes so that I know. Meanwhile, there are other things that you can think about. I'm not going to deliberate on that, but I could come up with three when I solve this. What if, for example, if the author has already factored in cost? He's told us that Vitex is more costly than once, but what if it is prohibitively costly to the point that you cannot expect a decent amount of sales, you cannot expect sales to be well, it's expected to sell well, you cannot have that expectation of selling well because of the prohibitive nature of the price. It's a little too expensive. That's possible. Similarly, there is a big difference between passing a ban in parliament or whatever and actually implementing it on the ground. Even if the ban is passed, what if it's not enforceable to the required degree, to a significant degree? What if compliance is very, very poor? Then even if the ban is passed, one's is selling like hotcakes on the black market because that ban was not passed properly, was not implemented properly, and therefore then you cannot expect Vitex to sell well because one's is still occupying that space. So I could come up with three, and there are actually more. You could come up with 4, 5 if you ask me. But end of the day, the one thing that in the exam you should be able to arrive at is this one. It is the most obvious logical gap. The author's entire logic is based on the fact that space is being created for Vitex by the exit of ones. So what if somebody else comes in? That should be your immediate pre-thinking. So far, so good. If this is clear, these are your underlying assumptions that will come in if you're able to do this pre-thinking. Now, again, let's look at the correct answer. The other manufacturers of small diesel engines in Marania, if there are any, they have not produced an engine as popular and clean running as Vitex new engine. Compare this with what we came up with. Essentially, no other competitor has a product that's at least as good, maybe better also, but at least as good. Why? Because if somebody has come up with a product that's at least as good, as popular as Vitex is expected to be, as clean running in terms of performance, then can you still expect Vitex to sell well? No. Again, Vitex may still sell well in reality, but that expectation you cannot have. You cannot make that claim that you expect it to sell well if somebody else has a good product. So option E is the correct answer. If you do a careful pre-thinking, if you visualized all these things, if you truly understood the logic of the argument, should be very, very clear. So Satvik, Varsha, I hope this helps. This gives you a bit of perspective on this particular question. Let's look at answer choice A. Again, somewhat popular. Some of you chose this. Again, you might not be analyzing this answer choice in full detail. You have to read through. It's a complex answer choice. You have to, with answer choice, the trick is there are two layers. First, you have to truly understand that answer choice. Only then you should jump into analysis. The mistake a lot of us make is we just jump directly into, you know, answer choice analysis. We jump directly to the analysis piece without actually focusing on understanding the piece first, the option first. So what's being said here? Marania's warehousing and transshipment businesses, okay, some certain businesses, warehousing, of course, we saw earlier also, they buy more diesel, correct, of any size than other types of engines. Use examples to understand complex choices. It will make your life so much easier. What does this exactly mean? Simple. Marania buys more diesel engines of any size. So you might have small diesel engines. Let's say you also have large diesel engines. There might be medium also. I don't care. End of the day, you have small diesel engines and you have large diesel engines. What is being said? Marania buys more of any size. So I buy more of small than any other type of engine. Any other type could be, let's say, petrol engine. This is a quick example. So I buy more small diesel engines than any type of petrol engine. I buy more large than any other type of engine also. Example being petrol. The key point here is very simple. End of the day, I'm buying more small diesel engines than I buy other engines. So, for example, I might buy 1 million. Okay, 1 million is a big number for a diesel engine, but anyway, I might buy 1 million small diesel engines, and then I might buy only 0.5 million petrol engines. This is, let me just make this a little clearer. Right? Here's the thing. Does this have to be true? Do I have to buy more small diesel engines than I buy petrol engines? What if I buy exactly 1 million small diesel engines and I buy exactly 1 million petrol engines as well? Does that mean that I cannot expect Vitex to sell well? No, because even this 1 million, irrespective of whether it is equal to this or greater than this or lesser than this, irrelevant. End of the day, this 1 million small diesel engines that these guys would buy, this might be a fantastically high number to the point that you can realistically expect Vitex to sell well. So this is how you analyze an option choice. It's actually a complex answer choice. Some of you just skipped through it and thought it was irrelevant, but in another question, a complex answer choice like this would be very, very relevant. Okay. So any quick questions? Is this clear? Is the logic of option A clear? Is the logic of option E clear? Make sure you drop a yes if things are clear, because that gives me that green signal to go move on. So option A, I hope is clear. More diesel engines of any size compared to all the other things. So the point is, it does not have to be more than any other type of engine. Maybe I buy less small diesel. I only buy 0.5 million small diesel engines, but I buy 1 million petrol engines. Even then, this 0.5 million could be a supremely high number, leading to a very realistic expectation of increased sales. So how can option B be a valid? How can option A be a valid assumption? It does not satisfy, must be true. Now this is a complex answer choice. So option B is a little easier to eliminate, honestly, because the author at some level has already factored in cost. The author told you that Vitex is costlier than once. He or she still expects it to sell well. Now, what that means is, I told you that this is costly. I told you that this particular item is costlier than the one's engine. Irrespective of that cost, irrespective of the fact that it's costlier than the currently popular one's engine, the currently widely used one's engine, even though it is costlier, I still expect it to sell well. Given this high cost, its cost right now is 1 million USD. Even at this price point, that is 1 million USD, I expect it to sell well. So am I really assuming that I'll be able to reduce the cost? How can it be a valid assumption? Does it matter if Vitex is able to reduce the cost for Vitex to sell well, to be expected to sell well? No, because I already told you that it's costly. I still expect it to sell well right now. And again, some of you just looked at the word cost, might have just looked at the word cost and just thrown it out of the window saying cost is irrelevant. But this is the actual analysis of how it is correctly, how well it's not actually irrelevant. It's perfectly relevant, just that it's not the correct answer. It is not really necessary. Let's look at option C. Slightly popular, not too much. Maranyan government will definitely pass the proposed ban. Now, if you're one of those people who chose option C, then you did not visualize this aspect. The conclusion is hypothetical. If the ban is passed, you expect it to sell well. Whether it actually gets passed, nobody cares. The author has not assumed at any point that this thing will definitely pass. Why? Because the conclusion is if the ban is passed, I expect it to sell well. Now, if you did not have this, if the conclusion is just so the Vitex engine is expected to sell well, then option C is a valid idea. Then you can always think, what if this ban does not get passed? It's a perfectly valid idea. But given that the conclusion says if the ban is passed, hypothetical, you don't care whether the ban is actually passed, option C becomes incorrect. Again, I want those of you who are listening here and 2025, if you're here, make sure you're catching these points. These are the mistakes that some of you at least tend to make if you're not careful. Option D is again a very, very interesting answer choice, and it plays on this enforceability aspect, because we even one of our ideas was that hey, the ban will be enforced to a certain level of degree, a significant degree, enough to create sufficient space for Vitex to fill, right? But why is option D still incorrect? Because again, you have to pay attention to these nuances. Difficult to enforce does not mean impossible to enforce, right? Even if something is difficult to do, think about your real life. Even if something is very, very difficult to do, it does not mean that you cannot do it with 100% compliance, with 100% brutal compliance, right? Following a very strict diet is a very difficult thing to do for a lot of people, but some people still do it with 100% compliance. Just because something is difficult to do, it does not mean it's impossible to do. And that's precisely the problem. It's that precision in wording, that difficult to enforce. You have to truly not rush and figure out what difficult to enforce really means. Difficult to enforce only means difficult to enforce. It does not mean it's impossible to enforce. Even if the ban, so the negation of option D, even if the ban is difficult to enforce, it may be enforced with 100% brutal compliance. Not even one single one's engine may be there even in the black market. Then you would still expect Vitex to sell well. The conclusion will not break, and therefore option D does not satisfy the negation test. I hope this is clear. Quick takeaways at this point. Again, you have seen the importance of understanding the conclusion. Will sell well versus expected to sell well. If you did not fall for it, and if you still chose option E here, if you did not notice that, and if you still chose option E here, you only got lucky. In another question, you will fall for this trap if you're not watching that. All right. Remember, you have to keep your conclusion and logic in mind when you're analyzing answer choices. We again saw strong application of the negation test. So I think that's also an important learning point that I want you guys to take away. Again, the minute you understood the logic of the argument. What is the logic? Vitex is in, ones is out, ones is that widely used player right now. So it's kind of making that space available for Vitex to come in, ones being banned. So when will it still not work if somebody else could come in? It's that simple, it's that intuitive, it's that organic. If you not do it mechanically, if you do it organically, if you just do it, keep things very simple. A few good seconds doing proper pre-thinking, it genuinely helps improve your understanding of the logic. You can see how easily we eliminated some of these answer choices, right? You understand some of those nuances in logic, which is what really those 700 plus questions are about. All right, I see some of you have solved it. I'm going to give a little bit more time. I see that there is a bit of a struggle here. Some of you are still thinking about this. All right, folks. So last 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and let's hold this. All right. So it's a very interesting question, and again, this is a question. Again, it's an OG question. It's in that 700 plus bucket. The reason it's a 700 level question is because three of the option choices are very, very good strengtheners. They're not the right answer, but they're very good strengtheners. Now, for example, here's how you guys polled on this particular thing. Let me just, yeah, so around 50% of you got the right answer. 50% of you got the right answer, and then I also see some certain options which are very, very popular, which you're going to see now. Okay, so what's happening in this question? The first thing is you have to realize here when you say author, it's the highway commissioner. We are asked to find an assumption behind the highway commissioner's claim. So my author for all practical purposes here is the highway commissioner. That's point number one. Now, very important to yet again understand what's happening here. What's given? In order to finance road repairs. So with the objective of financing road repairs. So what I want you to do when you read these kinds of arguments is break it down, express it in your own words without having to look, because that's like the acid test of visualization. Your brain is forming that picture, your brain is catching those nuances, you are catching exactly the meaning that you should be catching. So for to do that, you have to break things down, go chunk by chunk, build that understanding, let your brain process it. So here, for example, in order to finance road repairs, so with the objective of financing road repairs, so there are roads, you need to repair them, you need money for that. The highway commission of a certain state is considering, so again, it's not a done deal, it's just a plan at this stage, a 50% increase in the 10 cents per mile toll for vehicles using its toll highway. So essentially you have a highway, and you have these toll booths, and these toll booths charge a certain toll rate. So right now it's 10 cents per mile. The idea is that 50% increase, it will become 15 cents per mile. The highway commissioner claims, so this is the claim, this is the conclusion here, that the toll increase will increase the annual revenue generated by the toll highway, but by at least 50% per year. Per year, so annual. So what exactly is the conclusion here? I'm sure none of you had any problems figuring out what is the conclusion. Essentially, the annual revenue generated by the toll highway is going to increase by at least 50% per year thanks to the toll increase. Now, there are so many small aspects that you have to understand here. Now, for example, you're talking about annual revenue or per year revenue. You're not talking about monthly revenue or quarterly revenue, just things that your brain should absorb as you read. You're only concerned with revenue generated by the toll highway. You're not considering any other kind of revenue that, let's say the Ministry of Roadways is getting. No, revenue generated by this particular highway, that's the only focus here. The next point is important, at least 50%. It's not necessarily only 50%. So for example, the author says that, hey, the revenue right now is 1 million, it's going to be at least 1.5 million, at least 50%. It could also be 1.6 million, it could also be 1.7 million, but it cannot be 1.3 million. This is what the author is trying to tell you. So far so good. This point is important. Annual revenue which you get, this the highway generates thanks to the toll increase. The highway could generate revenue from many sources. For all you know, The highway might be getting revenue from advertisers for putting hoardings for putting digital or your non-digital hoardings all across the highway. They could be the highway, the people who are creating that highway or managing that highway, they may be making revenue through that. That's not a concern here. The only revenue that matters for this argument is revenue you're getting thanks to the increase in toll. You're increasing your toll by 50%. What is the revenue impact on that? That's the core focus of this argument. Now, it seems like a very simple sentence and we are going into a very granular level of detail, but it's when you get into this detail that in other questions you will see the benefit, where there are traps set here, there are pre-thought ideas that will come here if you focus on these aspects. So thanks to the toll increase, we're talking about the revenue which the highway generates thanks to this 50% increase in toll, nothing else. So far so good, I hope. Now let's move to the next piece, figuring out exactly what is happening here at a nuanced level. The conclusion is that the annual revenue generated by this toll highway, thanks to this 50% increase in the toll rate, it's going to increase. That's at least by 50%. What is the pre-thinking question here? At this point, you guys should be pros if you have followed what we have been doing all this while. Very simple. When will my annual revenue, which is generated by this toll highway, thanks to this toll increase, not increase by 50% or more? It could increase by 40%, but it's not going to increase by greater than equal to 50%, despite the toll increase of 50%. My toll rate, I'm increasing by 50%. Ideally, the author claims that revenue should also increase. When will it not increase? That's the only thing you need to be concerned with. Now, to answer this question, you need to go deeper, and it's a very simple thing. End of the day, the the author is looking at this toll rate which has increased from 10 to 15, 50% increase, and just based on the fact that the toll rate is increasing by 50%, the author claims that annual revenue should also increase by at least 50%, which means there is some relationship here which the author is assuming in his head or in her head. You need to find what that relationship is. So what is the relationship between toll rate and revenue? Anyone on the chat? I'll be very happy to see that. For and only 50, even in this question, only 50% of you got it right, which means at least 50% of you did not catch this earlier. Because if you had caught this point, there is no way you're going to go wrong in this question. But this is a 700 level question. If you check out your GC stats, you'll see a lot of people go wrong in this question. Anyone? How is my revenue related to toll rate? It's a very, very easy question to answer. It should not take you any time. But again, there is only 50% of you got even this particular question right. So there is something there which you need to learn. How is my revenue related to toll rate? Number of vehicles. All right. I'm seeing a few answers now. That's great. Number of vehicles traveling directly proportional to toll. Okay. Based on the distance being traveled. The correct answer, Apurva, Sajal, both of you have got it. It's entirely about distance, right? How do you know that? If your brain did not pay attention to cents per mile, then you may not have paid attention to this. Remember, the only revenue that matters here is the revenue from the toll highway, the revenue that's coming from the toll rate increase. This is the only revenue that matters. So what exactly is happening here? If you focus your attention on cents per mile, you understood what's happening. It's a per mile basis. It's cents per mile, or you could also say rupees per kilometer. End of the day, it's the same. What really impacts the revenue that you're going to generate is the distance. How much distance is being covered by all the people doing trips using their vehicles on this highway in 1 year time? That's the only thing that matters. So Akash says as the toll rate increases per car according to distance, then the revenue will increase. Exactly. It's eventually comes down to distance. And this is, in fact, in this particular question, this is the only assumption possible. There is no other assumption that works for this question. It's not, it's practically, I don't think this is possible to find any other assumption. This is the assumption. End of the day, or rather, the assumption is based on this one concept. End of the day, with the annual revenue we are talking about, it's based on toll rate and it's based on distance. The logic of the argument is very simple. Hey, my toll rate is increasing by 50%, therefore my revenue should also increase by at least 50%. When will my revenue not increase by at least 50%? If somehow my distance reduces. And again, you could use very simple examples to understand this. Let's say revenue is 100, toll rate is 10, and total distance covered was 10. Now you know that toll rate increased to 15. Now ideally your revenue should also have increased to 150. When will your revenue not increase to 150? If this other parameter, that is distance, somehow reduced from its current level. Instead of 10, if it became 8. Instead of 150, which is what you would have expected, now you're getting only 120. Your conclusion is breaking down in this one scenario. So the falsification condition, the condition where your conclusion breaks down, is that what if total distance traveled by all the people on this highway in this 1 year, in all their trips included, it reduces from its current level. If that happens, then your conclusion shatters, and therefore your underlying assumption is this: somehow the total distance traveled, it does not reduce from its current level. That's something the author is fundamentally assuming here. I hope this helps, because very, very important. Now, given this pre-thinking, now that you have spent this time figuring this out, now look at option E and tell me why it's not the right answer. So 50% of you chose option E, which means I'm very happy to see 50% of you had this clarity in your mind. Option E says the total distance traveled by vehicles on this highway per year, or in other words, annual, will not decrease from its current level. Exactly what we are seeing here. Why? Because if it reduces from its current level, again, use examples. It's the same example. If this 10 becomes 8, your 150, instead of being 150, becomes 120. Even though my toll rate has increased to 15 from 10. It's as simple as that. So the reason people go wrong here is sometimes you look at option B and it looks so close to the correct answer. Number of trips is a very good strengthener. It works for a strengthened question, but that's not the precision you need for assumption question. One of you chose option A, so for you I'm covering option A also. The amount of money required annually for road repairs will not increase from its current level. Here's the thing: the amount of money required is not the same as the revenue that you're generating. The revenue that you're generating from the highway, it's used for that purpose. That does not mean that whatever you generate, it's the same as the money needed for repair. No, in reality you may need 10 lakhs or 10 million, but the revenue you generate may be only 1 million. Those two entities are not the same. Those are two different entities. So if you went for option A, again, you forgot that you do not pay attention to the conclusion. The conclusion is about revenue. It's not about money required for road repair. Two different things altogether. Let's look at option B, which is the most popular incorrect choice. The total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. Without putting any mathematical formula, of course, I like putting the formula, but even without getting into any formulaic approach, think about it. Negate option B. What if the total number of trips reduces from its current level? Let's say it reduces by 10%. Does it mean that my revenue will reduce? No. Everything could still remain the same. Why? Even if my number of trips reduces, I could compensate for that by increasing the average distance per trip. So people are doing fewer trips. There are fewer number of people, fewer number of drivers doing trips, fewer number of trips are happening on this highway, but the trips that are happening have a higher distance on average. In simple words, if you break this down, total distance is nothing but number of trips into average distance per trip, right? Even if my number of trips comes down from its current level, something else could compensate to ensure that total distance still remains the same. So I could cover more distance on average in these trips, and because of that, my total distance can still remain the same. And as long as total distance remains the same, my conclusion does not break. Total distance is the only key parameter here. That's what you have realized. So, in essence, this is a fantastic strengthener. More people doing trips makes you believe more in the conclusion, but it's not must be true. It's not an assumption. It because it does not have to be true for your conclusion to hold true. Even if number of trips decreases, people could compensate by doing covering more distance in these trips because it is a distance basis here. So that's option B. One of you chose option C as well. So option C is the complementary piece. Again, it's the same logic. Number of trips and average length, or in other words, it means the same as average distance per trip. So even if my average distance or average length of trip came down, it can be compensated. What if people are doing more trips? Okay, people are not covering as much distance on the highway. The average distance per trip has come down, but on average, people are in overall doing much more total number of trips. So instead of earlier they were doing only 100 trips, now they're doing 150 trips. My total distance will still remain the same, and as long as total distance still remains the same, my conclusion will not break down. Option C also does not work. Option D was actually one of the popular choices in this set. Um, Again, without getting into the math, the logic is the same. Wonderful strengthener, and you have to be careful in analysis. Number of drivers avoiding the highways will not increase. So if you negate option D, let's say the number of drivers avoiding the highway, it will increase from its the negation of not increase is increase. So even if the number of drivers avoiding the highway, it increases from its current level. What does that translate to? If number of people avoiding the highway is increasing, that means number of drivers taking the highway instead. What if it decreases from its current level? But even if it decreases from its current level, number of drivers doing trips is less. But what if these drivers compensate by doing more trips on the highway? Or what if they cover more distance? Even if they're doing lesser number of trips, what if they do more distance in these trips? In any of these cases, my total distance could still remain the same. For those of you who like the math aspect of it, your total distance, we already broke it down, is essentially number of trips into average distance per trip. Your number of trips is nothing but number of drivers into average number of trips per driver. So even if my number of drivers taking the highway decreases from its current level, I could do on average more number of trips. Or even if I'm not doing more number of trips, I could cover more distance in the few trips that I'm doing. Either way, my total distance still remains the same. As long as my total distance remains the same, my revenue can increase by 50% or more. My conclusion can still hold true. Option D also does not work. So, very important takeaways here. Genuinely, this is a question where I've seen this time again. We have this question of recession as well. The people who are able to do pre-thinking, who are able to think of distance, who are focusing, who looked at unit, thought about distance immediately, because they spend that time thinking about deliberating on that logic. That deliberation on logic that you're doing, that is pre-thinking. People who have done that pre-thinking instantly chose option E. People who did not choose that, who did not do that pre-thinking, invariably most of them go for B. Some of them go for C and D also. Very clear data on this. The negation test, of course, we again saw how to do negation test. The core point is this: spend a few good seconds on pre-thinking. It genuinely helps you understand the logic. We went, how did we figure out that relationship? It's only when we did that pre-thinking. Earlier it was just that toll rate is increasing and therefore you expect annual revenue to increase. Then when we asked the question, when will my annual revenue not increase so much even though my toll rate is increasing by so much? Then it is that deliberation on that logic. If you're just visualizing the argument, okay, you got each and every element there, but it's the deliberation and logic that helps you arrive at this point. That is pre-thinking, and if you do the pre-thinking, it's a very easy question. So any questions, anything that's not clear, let me know, but I think this point should be clear at this point. So we are at the end of the session at this point. What is it that you learned? What is it that you've understood? There is definitely some of the takeaways that I want to communicate to you, but we'll be happy to hear from you as well. See, what is visualization? Understanding a sentence so well including each and every granular nuance as much as possible. It's a skill, so it's not like everybody gets every single nuance all the time. No, things don't work that way. It's a skill. There are questions where there are questions where I've done the question double digit number of times, and it was only in the 12th or 13th attempt that I noticed a certain nuance which I never saw. But the minute I noticed that nuance, okay, there's a certain level of understanding that came in. Hey, this was also an idea that's there. So it's a skill. Being able to visualize what you've seen today, being able to visualize every sentence as you read it, it's a skill. Focus on how we did it. We did not rush through the sentence. If you rush through the sentence the way you're reading a storybook, nothing on the GMAT is going to go your way. I can give it to you in writing, especially with CR and RC. It requires a focused effort where you catch all these nuances. You saw the minute you saw ought to sell, I mean, expected to sell or ought to sell versus will sell, it makes a difference. The word encouraged versus mandated makes a difference. Specific focus on downtown makes a difference. If you are reading carefully, you will, or in other words, you're visualizing things, you will catch all these nuances. You're understanding things at a level where you can explain that idea to your friend without looking at the test text. That this skill is very important. This is the one thing that would separate somebody who's stuck at a 650 or a 660 from somebody who can score a 720 and a 740 and beyond. When a person at this level reads arguments, they are able to catch all these nuances, which is not always the case, right? Again, remember, because we understood those nuances, we found those granular aspects, we found the exact argument, the exact conclusion. Expected to sell, not will sell. The exact logic, it's based on toll rate, nothing else. All those things you catch, it helps you in your answer choice analysis. That's again something that we saw. How did we eliminate an option B so easily? Because we understood that total distance is the only thing that matters here, and therefore it is anything really, number of trips or average distance or number of drivers, if it is not leading to total distance reducing, does not matter. Doing that visualization, understanding the total distance, that looking at that unit cents per mile, figuring it out, very important. Similarly with pre-thinking, those few seconds, like I said, once you build the skill, it's going to take you anywhere between 8 to 15 seconds. If you're doing pre-thinking for 1 minute, no, that's not the point. The point is to spend a few seconds, come up with one solid idea, do it before you get biased looking at the answer choices. If you start looking at the answer choices, your thinking is compromised. The objective is not to predict answer choices. Your objective is to apply your brain to the problem without any bias. That application of brain deepens your understanding. It will invariably, especially as the questions get tougher, it will help you in your answer choice analysis. Very, very important point. All right, folks. So thanks a lot. I hope this gave you a good idea about what we call the 1-2 punch. Visualization, pre-thinking, it gets you a lot of strong results. If you're able to apply these skills, if you build the skills, put in that effort, build that muscle, you'll see a lot of things go right for you in CR. Okay. So thanks a lot. With that, let's wrap this up. Thank you.